So when we started tinkering with like, how can we integrate AI into the entire workflow of Gamma, we started seeing glimpses of that being possible, of like having some sort of magical moment. And when we launched sort of our AI launch in March of 2023, that's when there was the massive inflection point. Everything sort of changed in terms of organic growth, word of mouth, virality, and then obviously stronger activation, stronger retention.
Welcome to Superhuman AI, the podcast where you learn what's going on in AI and how you can use it. Today, I'm joined by Grant Lee, who's the founder of Gamma AI. Gamma is one of the most successful generative AI products on the market today. It has over 20 million users and it's still growing fast. In this conversation, I'll ask Grant how they found the idea for Gamma, how they built the product, and how they grew it to tens of millions of users. Well, today we have Grant Lee with us, who is the co-founder of Gamma, which is one of the most successful generative AI products out there. Millions of users at this point, but beyond just being a massively successful product in terms of user growth, it's one of the few AI products that is genuinely sticky and has some retention. So without further ado, Grant, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and Gamma?
Yeah, so Gamma, we're trying to build a modern alternative to PowerPoint, which I'm sure is a tool the vast majority of audience have used multiple times in their careers. And we started the company a little bit over 3.5 years ago, really by trying to reimagine kind of what the fundamental building blocks that go into how people present and share their ideas. And slowly over time, adding different primitives, but also then integrating AI and helping really just streamline the entire creation flow for users.
Awesome. And how many users do you have at this point? I've read some things that you guys have 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. I'm not sure. Like, what are the user numbers like at this point?
Yeah, we have well over 20 million registered users at this point, millions of monthly actives. And so, yeah, growing steadily and, adding to that user base.
I did look on SimilarWeb, like publicly available data. Like you guys are definitely getting millions of kind of visitors every month, but seems like folks are spending a lot of time and visiting a lot of pages as well, way more than other generative AI products I've looked at, which is obviously insane. So, let me just get right to it and ask you the $1 million question. 20 million users, like how'd you guys do this?
Well, it was definitely not some sort of, I say overnight success story like many startups kind of claim to have. For us, in building a horizontal product, oftentimes you feel like in the beginning, things are super flat because inevitably when you're trying to build something like a product like ours, it feels very much like a toy in the beginning. It's not something that anyone's going to use for any real work. A lot of what we did in the early years was kind of just introduce simple building blocks to get a sense for like, could we introduce something that would give people an easy enough sort of entry point into a new medium. And we kind of tested that over and over and over again. We launched our private beta back in 2021. And I'd say it wasn't really until kind of August of 2022 when we did our public beta launch, and this was actually pre-AI, where we started seeing some stronger signal that the product was getting to a point where it's complete enough such that people could actually use it. But even then, it wasn't good enough for people to tell all their friends about. Like it was good enough for you to kind of use privately on some of your projects. And so we knew we still had a lot of work to do. If you've listened to sort of the Sam Altman quote of, 80% of the job of a startup is making sure that you get a product that is so good that people are telling all of their friends about. Like that's 80% of the job, just getting a product so good that people want to tell all of their friends about spontaneously, like without any sort of incentive or motivation. And I think for us, like that was a sort of like North Star. Can we do something where, if someone needed to create content, create a presentation. And so when we started tinkering with like, how can we integrate AI into the entire workflow of Gamma, we started seeing glimpses of that being possible, of like having some sort of magical moment. We basically completely revamped our onboarding flow with AI creation at the core of it. And then we started introducing that to our early users just to show them like, okay, how does this change the way you operate? And immediately the feedback was like, this is incredible. You need to be basically sharing, like you should be sharing this broadly. Like this has to be part of the product. This has to be core to the product. So we ended up spending, several months to really kind of reimagine that from the ground up, how people use Gamma, how people get started in Gamma. And when we launched sort of our AI launch in March of 2023, that's when there was the massive inflection point. Everything sort of changed in terms of organic growth, word of mouth, virality, and then obviously stronger activation, stronger retention, and all of it then becoming a sort of a stickier sort of set of solutions that our users can lean on.
Grant, I think like that's amazing, right? Like you talk about like the AI integration really kind of caused that inflection for Gamma to become like the super growth engine we know today of like 20 plus million users. So in your opinion, right, like there are a lot of other companies who are also integrating these things in their product. Like what kind of separated Gamma's integration in their approach to kind of cause that inflection like other folks have not been able to kind of mimic or even kind of get close to?
I think there's kind of an interesting distinction between maybe like an AI first approach versus an AI native approach, which is, AI first, you might sort of lean very heavily on having AI do all of the work and assume that that could be the product itself. Versus for us, like being an AI native startup where we actually already had a lot of the primitives I talked about, like the building blocks that we had been working on for several years. And the building blocks for us kind of served a greater need, which is, we felt like the future of work was evolving. So, we used to all use slides as a sort of static format, 16 by 9. But where we thought, the future of work kind of heading towards was a world where people needed to share content that could be mobile friendly, mobile responsive by default, could be interactive, could be multimedia rich. And so that even if you don't have design skills or technical skills yourself, you'd be able to present work in a way that had all those attributes. And so for us, it was, let's build those building blocks that make that even possible. And now we can leverage AI to sort of pre-assemble those building blocks for new users so that they have a much flatter learning curve. And so I think if you kind of were to eliminate or remove the building blocks from the equation, it becomes much trickier. You're trying to lean heavily on AI doing all of the work for you or all of the work for the new users. And I don't think we're quite there yet. I don't think it's yet possible for that to kind of replace, completely replace what people need to be able to get the job done. When it comes to presentations.
No, I think like you hit it on the point, right? Like you really need to understand the workflow and know where to embed the AI. You can't just like get the AI to do the whole thing for you. So Grant, like you have a very interesting background before you were starting even Gamma, right? Like you did mechanical engineering at Stanford, work in finance, consulting, then were in leadership roles at some startups. What is the inspiration and motivation behind leaving this growth stage finance world to start an early stage company like Gamma?
So the idea of like building something 0 to 1 has always been sort of something I've been passionate about. Later on in my career, kind of had the opportunity to run larger organizations, finance and operations being core. And when you think about how a lot of these organizations communicate, slide decks, presentations are often how ideas get spread within an organization and how big decisions get made. And so I've lived in slide decks. So I think it was the acute pain point, just realizing like no one else is going to be better positioned for me for someone to actually be able to solve these sort of problems. And so why not just try to do it ourselves?
As I was doing background research for this interview, one of the things that I came across was that the team at Gamma seems to have done a lot of work internally in terms of testing the product, doing presentations. I saw a couple of very funny presentations as well. How much of like the journey towards product market fit was the team testing this stuff internally versus taking it out to the customer? Or did you guys just get to product market fit internally and then take it out to the customer?
When you're early on, basically you're trying everything you can to get other people to try your product. And, you might have your friends try it or maybe, former coworkers and, they're sort of doing you a favor and they might say all these nice things, but at the end of the day, it's really hard to trust anything they say because they're really trying their best not to hurt your feelings. And so you sort of take a lot of that with a grain of salt. And what you actually end up doing is sort of observing what they actually do with the product. So like after they've onboarded, do they go back and actually use the product? And for a while, those numbers were pretty low. Like we would, introduce this to a batch of our friends and, very, very few of them would ever come back to the product. So we knew the bar was pretty high. And we knew like we could still at the same same time, be our first early users. We could dog food a ton and just understand like through intuition, like what are going to be the things that are going to be kind of needle movers in the long run, and sort of really relentlessly kind of, ensure that we're making progress on the product. So I'd say it was definitely a combination of the two. In the beginning is like try to convince other people to use it, see what's valuable, do a ton of dog fooding because really, that's going to be kind of consistent usage and you can kind of see the evolution of the product. And then you get to a phase of growth where if you're building for a market where maybe you as a dog fooder, for us, like being a small startup, tech startup, we are actually representative of the target user anymore, then you almost need to kind of disassociate your own feedback at times from what you think is actually best for the end user. Then it's really about double down on kind of understanding their feedback, their needs, were there problems in terms of either adopting the product or the problems in their daily life, and how can you make all of that much easier for them?
As you were talking about that, like the burning question that I have is, what are some of like the counterintuitive things that you've learned, right? So you're dog fooding this to users, you're probably learning a lot of things. What were some things about, how users were adopting this or using the product that you just weren't expecting?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones for anyone that's building more of a horizontal product, so whether it's like prosumer or even consumer in the beginning, is like, oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh, if you're building a startup, you have to focus on the ICP or like the persona, like who is the target user. And so, people then oftentimes try to define that by saying, okay, what's the job function or like what's, some makeup of demographic. And that ends up being really, really challenging when you're building something a little bit more horizontal. And what we ended up finding more useful is really thinking about the pain points that somebody has, which allows you to zoom out a little bit. Like, for instance, when it comes to presentation, if we were to say, hey, we're going to solve a salesperson's, pain point, that ends up becoming very narrowly focused on very subset of like niche problems that maybe only a sales team cares about. And you might do really great things. And at the end of the day, maybe just have a great product for a sales team, but not great for anybody else. But if you zoom out and you think about what are universal challenges that people making presentations might have, well, the vast majority of us are visual learners, but very few of us are visual designers. And if we all know that well-designed products or content are more trustworthy, give you higher credibility, or more likely to persuade an audience or others, then we all need to elevate our level of design in some way. And so how can we address that huge gap? And so when we zoomed down and said, okay, we saw consultants facing the same challenges, we saw marketers facing the same challenges, we saw salespeople facing the same challenges. It wasn't just like the ICP, it was a universal pain point that we could try to address. And really honing in on that was what really helped us, I think, kind of elevate sort of just not only just the ambition, but also like what are the most important things we could prioritize.
So kind of like talking about the product, love to kind of like hear from you, like what are kind of the key AI stack like you approach, like you've used to build the product? But as a builder myself, I'm sure there are a lot of builders who are listening to this podcast as well. Love to kind of be curious to see how Gamma approaches different models, like what are you using for telemetry, like what is kind of the core stack which kind of allows to power this amazing product?
So for us, I think we recognize that the underlying technology is all advancing pretty fast. So how can we position ourselves to be able to, test and iterate a ton across different models, both open and closed, and recognizing that, at the end of the day, if you are a builder and you're trying to build something for your users, the equation is pretty simple. You're trying to deliver the most value at the lowest cost. No matter how you want to slice and dice, is like that's the fundamental equation for a business to thrive in the long run. And so for us, like we can measure quality by just saying, of all the different models that are out there, we can experiment to see which ones are actually delivering, the results that our users care about. And on the cost side, it's similar, right? Like we can actually see, like, okay, given any set of, any part of the tech stack, like what is actually going to be, kind of economically the most viable across different maybe types of users. You might have your early adopters versus like your power users versus like maybe your larger organizations. So I think we're constantly, like we've designed our infrastructure in a way that allows us to experiment a ton of this. build sort of internal telemetry to understand, is the model doing what we want it to do? Does it actually produce the output we would expect as an end user? And does it get them to stick around longer term?
Was it really challenging kind of thinking about this architecture as you were building the product? Or like, did you think like it was really easy? There were a lot of off-the-shelf things you can kind of package together. Like, how did you kind of approach that?
Yeah, I mean, this is another piece where, a year ago, it was not very obvious. I think we were more in the camp of, underlying technology is moving fast, so let's be in a position to ride the wave as fast as it's able to move and position ourselves that way. I think there has been much more sort of tooling made available over the past year. A year ago, not much of that existed. So I think we've kind of sprinkled in things here and there, but also knowing that to kind of sort of tailor, kind of to the needs, we almost need more of a bespoke solution. So how can we build some of it today such that at least we have some basic telemetry, and then what might we adopt over time? It's constantly changing. I think every month it's kind of like a reassessment of, is it, are we better off dedicating engineering resources to core product or infrastructure and scaling? And it's a constant sort of, assessment based on, what we think is the best ROI.
Awesome. I think that's a very insightful answer. And I think it gives us a good understanding of how you've built this and gotten a product market fit. And I hope it does for the listener as well. So building an amazing product, obviously the first and most important thing, but then there's this other whole thing, which is finding users and getting them to use these things. And you guys have been massively successful at doing that. Can you tell us a little bit more about like, what does that spike in growth look like? Like, where does it come from and how has it been ever since?
Yeah, so that was right around, I think March 2023 when we launched our first set of AI capabilities and kind of revamped our onboarding. And so, I think part of our job as a builder is also kind of just trying to pique people's interest. And so, if we were just to say, hey, we're building Slides 2.0, maybe that would not have been as interesting of a story to tell, or a narrative where people would be intrigued enough, because I think that story has been told many times. But if we talk about like a very important business skill, or a skill that potentially can impact someone's career. And so, if we can kind of lean into that sort of need that, many people have in their careers to elevate their own work, I think that helped pique people's interest. And then because we had sort of revamped our onboarding flow, I think we kind of had the mindset of how can we make it dead simple for any new user to create something in Gamma and then to share it. Like that part of the sort of a flywheel, we believe that if we can get that initial flywheel spinning, then by nature of the product, like if you're creating presentations, you're sharing it with others. And so we've invested a lot of time just getting that initial flywheel spinning. And for the it's not going to be every person that signs up that's going to fall in love with your approach, but for the subset of people that do, like how can we continue to deliver them value, get them super excited, get them to tell all their friends, get them to continue to present and share their work with others. I think that's kind of been the longer term sort of mandate for us following that initial launch. But because organic virality was so strong, like we've been able to just continue to kind of have those sort of massive tailwinds of every new set of new users that come in. They're helping us spread the word. We build like a small community of our power users that we call the Gambassadors, which is basically anybody that's spent a bit of time in the product, we try to build a relationship with, and we invite them to a Slack workspace. We really try to understand like what are the things that they're still running into challenges with, introduce them to new concepts that we're testing, get their initial feedback, and use that small sort of fire to hopefully build a bigger fire, which is like this small community is willing to sort of spend time to with us, giving us feedback, is willing to be our early evangelist, and it's been tremendously helpful to just really be able to have some group of people to lean on when it comes to like initial ideation, continued improvements to the product, and distribution.
Awesome. So follow-up question there is, you guys are obviously seeing a big growth spurt once you've kind of revamped the onboarding and you're seeing all this product-led growth. I remember the product early on was free or had credits. I can't remember exactly. At this point, I'm guessing you guys are burning through tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars of sort of like API credits at this point. Like, what's going through your mind? Like, how long did you guys keep this free? And then how did you guys come to a decision to charge money for this? Like, what was the thought process there?
Yeah, so when we initially launched, we gave all new users a set of AI credits so that they can use the tool, explore. We actually still have that model today, so we wanted to give people a little bit of room to play and explore. And we actually had no plans to kind of immediately monetize the product, but we were sort of thrust into making a decision quickly. It was okay. Well, if we want to be able to keep these users coming back, can we make it just really simple for them to basically get either unlimited credits or like a credit refill somehow? And we've kind of kept to the same sort of very basic pricing and packaging since then. We've made some sort of tweaks here and there, but it was really just in service of just letting kind of people that really wanted to continue using a product on a sort of unlimited basis to give them a path to do so.
So 0 to 1 is really hard. It's very like scary sometimes to like leave like amazing positions and come back to building a company from the get-go. And what was going in your mind? Like, how do you overcome that fear on your side?
I think from very early on, like my ambition was always, I'd love to be able to start something from scratch, really do the 0 to 1 work. And I've actually kind of progressively at every stage of my career gone earlier and earlier stage. And so started off in like massively large, consulting and investment banking organizations, and then going from 10 million in ARR to over 100 million in ARR, and then realizing like I wanted to get back even earlier. And so joined ClearBrain, which was at the time, 5 employees, and we got to go from 0 ARR to 1 million in ARR before we were acquired. The natural progression after that is like I saw basically to go from product to 1 million in revenue. How do I go pre-product? And like, what is it like to actually take even just an idea or like the vague concept of an idea and turn that into a business? And so that was kind of the journey at Gamma. I knew I always wanted a shot at that, and it really felt like this was the right time to finally do it.
So I read somewhere like as we were doing research on Gamma is that like you guys are profitable. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
That's an ideal situation to be, right? Like you've raised venture, your growth stage company with 20 million plus users, profitable. So how do you kind of think about this situation? What does the future hold for Gamma?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the mindset has always been, and as a startup, we've lived through some crazy times already, despite being pretty young startup. When we first started, obviously this peak pandemic, we ended up finding a small office in San Francisco, even though it was shelter in place at the time. So we've always been this super sort of scrappy cockroach mentality startup. Obviously, even last year, like 2 weeks before our launch, this was when there was the SVB crisis, where the entire kind of startup community was kind of really just kind of shaken quite a bit, just because there were really existential questions at that point in time around like would we even be able to make payroll? So I think all those things sort of create your own sort of mental model of for us, we want to build super efficiently. I think it's not necessarily a goal of ours to be cash flow positive at this stage, but it ends up just being sort of the side effect of like we are scrappy, we do run super efficiently. I think the thing as a founder that you always want to make sure is like you want to stay super ambitious. Like you need to ensure that you're still taking really big swings, because your goal isn't to build like at least for us, isn't to build sort of a niche product that only a subset of users use. It's to build something that has a chance at kind of enduring and being one where users around the world can lean on for things that are really impactful for their daily lives. And to have a chance of that, you have to stay super ambitious. I think the next phase of growth for us will be continue to kind of make sure that we're pushing those directions that matter, and staying super hungry and super ambitious.
So obviously, you have a breakout success on your hands. Seems like y'all are doing super well. Amazing product. What are some hard-earned lessons that you've sort of like earned or learned along this journey? And what are some things you'd like to share with other folks who are trying to build with or in AI at this point?
I think one of the hardest things as in the 0 to 1 phase, they call it kind of going through the idea maze. You're basically kind of wandering in this maze, and there's likely maybe some sort of a way through it, but you're kind of constantly bumping into things. You don't know if you're actually circling back to the right direction or not, and you'll be going through this. I think one way to acknowledge that is even at the outset, is just to remind your team like how hard this is, and to maybe calibrate based on talking to other founders in a similar space. So for us, we had the benefit of learning from, our predecessors, which are the Canvas, the Figmas, the Notions, the Airtables of the world. That all took like 4 or 5 years before they hit their sort of initial inflection point. And 5 years in startup land is a long time. Like if you're grinding for 5 years, you just know, that is a long time to be working on something. But if you know going in it's going to take that long, or you're anticipating, it makes it that much easier. It's just like if you're going into a workout, it's going to be an hour of intense workout. At least you're prepared for that, versus like just being thrown into maybe a CrossFit exercise and not being prepared for it. You would just die immediately. And so I think having that mental model of like what is it going to take to be successful? And so for us, like we're anticipating things getting harder and harder, not easier and easier for us. And I think that sort of mentality forces us to sort of push through any sort of obstacle, knowing that there's going to be something at the other end. And I think if you can give anything to your team, if you're building, is like this mentality of kind of perseverance, or like really going back to the scrappiness, like being able to push through when times are tough, because inevitably you're going to face many of those challenges along the way.
100%. What's been the hardest moment for you or the team as, when you look back at this whole journey so far?
I'd say I could probably pin it back to the moment I alluded to, which is 2 weeks before launching, SVB situation. And we didn't have all of our money there, but we had much of our money, a lot of our money there. And I don't think many founders probably talk about that moment in time where, you're worried about even making payroll. And, in my mind, the only thing I could think of was, we didn't come this far to only get this far. Like, we are going to find a way to push through this. I don't care what it takes, but we're going to push through. I think is really kind of, for us, like one of the defining moments in our early life as a startup. Is like, team rallied. We knew we were going to do everything we could to make the launch successful. Nothing was going to block us from doing that. And it happened on the exact same day that we had planned for 4 months prior.
What are some things that you're excited for or looking forward to over the next 12 months?
I think when you think about most people are super intimidated when it comes to the idea of building a website even. Like, how can we simplify that so it doesn't seem like a super intimidating thing, and make it so that people can spin up all different types of content formats easily? Because I think that just unlocks the spreading of great ideas. And if we can make that easier, I think that's going to be awesome. I think the fact that, we talk about audio, video, all these sort of modalities, all there's so much innovation happening with AI. If we can, package that up in ways that makes it easier for our users to take advantage of it, I think that's also going to be awesome.
So granted, to wrap up, I have 2 questions on my end. So the first one is that, there are a lot of builders around the world who are now leveraging Gen AI to build companies, especially if you're not in North America. What advice would you give for such builders? Maybe 3 things which they can keep in mind, because they don't have access to the venture capital industry as we have in the US or in the US or North America in general. So what will be your advice for them?
I think to build something enduring, just because it's so hard, that in 1 year you can make some progress, but to make real progress is going to take many years. I do think just being careful of not just chasing the next shiny object or the easy thing that you can spin up, but really being mindful of the space that you're trying to operate in. I think too many people go after the easier thing to start with, but not necessarily the thing that they can see themselves doing for multiple years.
Thanks for joining me for this conversation. This was part of a short series of podcasts that I'm recording. I'll record maybe 5 or 10 episodes and see how it goes. So if you want me to continue recording these episodes and you like this, please let me know by dropping me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Thanks again, and I'll catch you soon.